وسهلا بكل الذين ينضموا للاستماع إلى راديو بلدي، أول راديو عربي أمريكي ويعنى بقضايا العرب في المهجر. برامجنا في راديو بلدي كل يوم جمعة من 8 وحتى 9 صباحا مع ليلى الحسيني في بث حي ومباشر عبر WNZK راديو 690 AM. صباح الخير بلدي، صباح الخير لكل مستمعينا.
Welcome to Radio Baladi, the first Arab, Middle Eastern, and American simulcast radio show. Radio Baladi is broadcast every Friday morning on WNZK 690 AM from 8 until 9 Eastern Time on Good Morning Michigan with Layla Al-Husseini. Our call-in number 248-557-3300. And now, stay tuned for the best radio talk show on Arab and American issues with your host, Layla Al-Husseini.
I am Atif Abdel Jawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs. WNZK 690 AM and WDMV 700 AM.
Good morning. ISIS is brutal. That's not my judgment. It's what their videos tell. They are using modern devices to push the Middle East back into the Middle Ages. That's what their preachings say. So everybody now wants to destroy them by the force of military power. But there are voices calling for peaceful means to stop ISIS, whatever that means. Rare voices, lone voices. One of them is Kelly Hayes Wright, author and citizen journalist as she calls herself. She traveled to Iraq before and after the U.S.-led invasion. She has been to Syria helping Iraqi refugees and to Lebanon talking with Syrian refugees. Now she is writing a book about her experience. Living Large in Limbo, How I Found Myself Among the World's Forgotten. Today, we have Kelly Hayes Wright as our guest. Good morning, Kelly.
Good morning. Thank you for allowing me to join you.
Tell us first, Kelly, what you mean by stopping ISIS by peaceful means.
Well, I think one of the things you just said in your introduction that's so important is that there are so many governments and disparate factions right now that are unique in that they're united in opposing ISIS. And certainly we saw that with the initial bombings that occurred, President Obama was successfully able to pull together a very disparate coalition. But why weren't those same members brought in a coalition together to try to stop ISIS peacefully by drying up their black market money that they use for crude oil and gas, or by working regionally to cut off the supply of weapons? There's a wide range of diplomatic and non-military actions that could have occurred, that still can occur, between doing nothing and bombing a population. Because let's face it, when we're bombing, we don't really know who we're hitting. And we haven't really gotten full reports yet out of Syria who was hit by this past weeks of bombing. So my plea, and the reason why I've created a petition to stop ISIS peacefully, is for the United States to use its leadership, to use this very unique moment in time and history when all of these different governments are united in their opposition to ISIS. Iran, Iraq, Syria, Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, other Western allies to the United States are all united in their opposition to ISIS. And I think we could be more creative about bringing that coalition to bear on diplomatic and non-military solutions as a way of stopping ISIS, but also protecting civilians and not increasing civilian casualties.
But Kelly, ISIS are killing innocent people. They are persecuting minorities and using knives and guns.
That's right, they are, and they should be stopped. but there's a number of ways of stopping them, and there's a wide range of activities between doing nothing and bombing populations. I mean, look at what happened last summer in Syria. I was in Beirut when the horrible killings with the chemical weapons occurred of all those children. We saw all those heart-wrenching, gut-wrenching photos coming out of Syria of the children who were gassed by Bashar Assad's regime. And the United States' immediate reaction was that they wanted to start bombing in the outskirts of Damascus. But then look what happened. There was an alleged gas that was made by U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry that brought Russia into bear, and now we have Bashar Assad's chemical weapons cache has been dismantled, which was a wonderful thing to have happened, to take those terrible weapons out of his hands, and it was done without dropping a single bomb. So we've seen in very recent history that there really are opportunities for creative negotiation. Now let me be really clear. I'm not talking about negotiating with ISIS, because frankly, we don't even know who they are. And we don't know which part of the opposition to Bashar Assad's regime are ISIS and which ones aren't. And it's very difficult to discern. So I'm not talking about negotiating with ISIS. I'm talking about negotiating this unique coalition into forcing ISIS's hand, into drying up their money. We know right now, we know so very little about ISIS, but here's what we do know. We know that these are fighters coming in from documented 74 different countries from around the world. We know that some of them are religious zealots. We know that some of them are just disaffected youth. We know that they are getting $3 million a day by selling crude oil and gas on the black market. We know that they are the most well-funded terrorist organization in the world. Now, what if we took that fantastic coalition, Iran, Iraq, Syria, Saudi Arabia, the Gulf states, U.S., Western allies, Russia, and united them in drying up those dollars so that ISIS could no longer sell their crude oil on the black market? That would be a huge blow to them. What if the United States stopped sending more weapons over to the Middle East? Because we don't know where those arms, what arms those arms end up in. And so here we are, here the United States, on one hand, in Syria, is arming rebel forces against Bashar al-Assad. And again, some of those people are ISIS. And then we're also supporting the government in Iraq when ISIS is in Iraq fighting that very government that we're supporting. I mean, it makes absolutely no sense. So what I'm calling for in the petition that I've put up online is for a regional approach to fighting ISIS diplomatically, because there are a range of options there that have not been explored, have not been exhausted. And if any of our listeners want to look at the petition, it's at www.arewereallyoutofiraq.com. www.arewereallyoutofiraq.com. And so far, we've got about 5,500 signatures. It's up on moveon.org's platform. And what I'm trying to do with this is just raise the level of debate so that we have an opportunity to discuss the full range of responses to ISIS that are available to us.
Okay. We are going to discuss your petition in a second. But I thought that the regional alliance, the regional approach already exists, and the effort to isolate ISIS financially and also geographically are underway. And in fact, the UN Security Council just passed a resolution to that effect. But let me ask you this. You, in effect, are you calling for this peaceful approach to be also applied not just to ISIS, but, we have Jabhat al-Nusra, we have Khorasan, we have Al-Qaeda, we have Al-Shabaab in Somalia, we have Ansar al-Sharia in Libya, and Ansar Bayt al-Maqdis in Egypt, among many other groups throughout the Middle East and North Africa. So you want a peaceful approach to all those groups?
I think we should be exploring and exhausting every peaceful opportunity there is to stop terrorism. Because by bombing, we're not stopping terrorism. We're actually increasing it. I mean, let's face it. If 100,000 U.S. troops in Iraq over the last decade couldn't wipe out Al-Qaeda in Iraq, which we know is the precursor to ISIS, then why do we think we can do it without another full-scale war? Why do we think a few bombings is going to stop it? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. Here we're repeating the same mistakes again and again and again. And what does that do? It hits civilians. It hits infrastructure. It makes it more difficult for young people to get jobs and to have futures. It creates a huge refugee population that is very destabilizing for, well, not only for the refugees themselves and the families, but for all of the countries that are surrounding Iraq and Syria. And so we're actually creating recruits for these terrorist organizations by reacting in such a violent, disproportionate way when we have not exhausted all of the diplomatic opportunities. Bombing should be a last resort, not a first resort. And that's what I'm calling for in this petition.
Okay, stay with us, Kelly, please. We will be back after the break.
Senabriku for all your Metro Detroit real estate needs. 248-755-3494. Whether buying or selling, short sales, foreclosure, or investment for both business and residential, call Senabriku, owner and broker of St. Jude Realty, at 248-755-3494. If you're facing legal problems, it's time to get the right attorney working for you. Ziad Gossett is experienced in foreclosure defense, eviction, and real estate law, as well as immigration matters, workers' comp, bankruptcy, business law, and all criminal matters. With attorney Ziad Gossett in your corner, you won't have to fight alone. Call 248-680-7300. That's 248-680-7300.
I am Atif Abdel Jawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs. WNZK 690 AM and WZMV 700 AM.
Welcome back to our discussion with citizen, journalist, and author Kelly Hayes-Rick, and we are discussing her call for a peaceful approach to dealing with ISIS. And let me ask you this, Kelly. You were in Syria, you were in Iraq, you went through some risky adventures there. But if you were in Iraq or Syria now, and you became a hostage of ISIS or another militant group, do you think they would be nice to you?
I don't even know why that question is relevant, because you and I both agree that ISIS is brutal, they're terrorists, they should be stopped, and they can't be negotiated with. So I'm not even sure what the question means.
So you would still call for a peaceful approach?
Yes, I think we don't do any good by bombing. Bombing should be, as I said before, a last resort, not a first resort. And because bombing doesn't work. It hasn't worked in the past. So what makes us think that it's suddenly going to work now?
Did that approach work with Al-Qaeda? Didn't they get Osama bin Laden using force?
We used strategic force specifically on his compound. We didn't go in and start, well, we did go in and start bombing Afghanistan and Iraq, but that's not what got Osama bin Laden. and I'm going to go back to this point again. The United States occupied Iraq for an entire decade. We had hundreds of thousands of troops in there at that time, and we were unable to stop Al-Qaeda then. And what happens when we use military force in such a way, especially bombing, because we don't exactly know which targets we're hitting, and we end up hitting schools, bridges, roads, hospitals, homes, civilians. When that occurs, what we're actually doing is creating an angrier, more disaffected population that are then ripe for recruiting by these crazy terrorist organizations. And we saw, and I'm going to go back to this again, we saw last summer that there was creative diplomacy used that got rid of one of the world's last caches of chemical weapons without a single bomb being dropped by the United States. And that's something that was very important not only for the world, but certainly for Syrians, certainly for the Syrian opposition, certainly for the children of Syria, to have those chemical weapons gone. And I don't think bombing would have done that, would have accomplished that. But creative diplomacy did.
Okay, let me ask you this. Let's suppose for a second that we will stop bombing ISIS. They are in control of territories inside Iraq and Syria. And let's suppose we apply your approach and we dry up their funds and we use diplomacy, we use all peaceful means available to us. Do you think that will dislodge them from the territories they have right now under their control?
If they don't have any money coming in and they don't have any weapons coming in, I'll bet that would make a huge dent in them, more so than galvanizing them against an enemy. And again, if our listeners want to look at the petition more carefully with the sources, the research sources that I used, they can visit www.arewereallyoutofiraq.com. arewereallyoutofiraq.com. And the petition is on that page, and people can click through to sign it. And then there's also links to the different research sources that I used.
Have you received any response to your petition, either from the White House, Congress, or any other official organization?
I haven't delivered it yet to Congress and to the White House, and I'm waiting to see what kind of response it gets. But so far, 5,500 people have signed it. CNN has covered it. It's being sent out virally through different networks in the United States. But my main point with doing this petition, and the reason why I so appreciate your having me on your show this morning, is that I just want to get the word out there that there are other options besides bombing. I mean, I too have read the news all summer long about the atrocities that ISIS and these other terrorist organizations are committing. I've lived I've worked and stayed in the Middle East and had a chance to see some of this firsthand, the impact of this terrorism. So my point about it is that we don't need to feel helpless, and we don't need to bomb. That there are a range of activities between doing nothing and bombing these countries. And that's where I think it's imperative that the United States use its leadership and engage all of these other countries in the Middle East who are all opposed to ISIS to use some of these creative, non-military, diplomatic solutions that help save lives. I mean, let's face it. There are very few good guys in the Middle East anymore. There are atrocities being committed on every side. And that's not something we want to foster.
How many people do you think so far have signed up for your petition?
About 5,500. And it's growing daily. I mean, every time I go on and check on it, there's another dozen or so people that have signed.
Obviously, you went through a lot during your travels in the area. And tell us now how you found yourself among the world's forgotten. That's, let me borrow from the title of your forthcoming book.
Oh, thank you. Well, I traveled to Iraq in February of 2003, just 5 weeks before the U.S.-led invasion. And it was my first time in the Middle East, and I was very struck by how warm and welcoming the Iraqis were, terrified of new bombing coming, of a new invasion, of a new war starting. But yet still people were very, very warm and welcoming with me. And I came back to the United States and wrote a series of articles about my experiences with Iraqis, and then I returned a few months later to update those stories. And I've stayed in touch with one family over the last 10 years, and my book kind of follows him and his family through their experiences during the war and the occupation and fleeing to Damascus. I spent time with them in Damascus in the summer of 2008 before the civil war occurred. And I think it's very important for Americans to put a human face on our foreign policies. It's so easy to think of, we're just bombing over there, and we don't think about bombing this child or this mother or this father or this family or what that means for a teenager's future. And so I'm hoping that my book will put a human face on our foreign policies, and we'll just get Americans thinking a little bit differently about these military solutions, quote unquote.
And tell us about any situation you may have found yourself in which scared you a lot, which you thought was placing yourself in danger.
Well, I'm not a thrill seeker, I'll be honest with you. I want to stay alive. I want to be able to continue doing this work. So I don't go out to put myself into situations where I'm going to be facing danger. But I will say that the most dangerous situation that I found myself in Iraq during the occupation was actually from U.S. soldiers. And I was out with a couple of other people that were part of my group. And we had just gone to visit Qasr, the port city in the southern part of Iraq, to see what kind of damage had been done and whether or not the port was still operating. And I'm not sure if our driver took a wrong turn or if we encountered roadblocks and so forth, but we ended up in a very deserted area outside of Qasr and ended up surrounded by U.S. soldiers who, of course, were as scared as I was, and we're wondering why this van being driven by an Iraqi man and an Iraqi translator, and that's all they could see, was driving in this deserted area. So there we were out in the middle of the desert, surrounded by U.S. soldiers with their guns pointing at us. I didn't really think they would do anything, but it was a dicey situation there until it calmed down. And, and again, we just all piled out of the van and explained who we were, and but it took a moment to de-escalate the fear and the danger. There were the dangerous possibilities, I should say. But again, my interest is more in talking with individual people and bringing their stories back to Americans, so that we can have a broader discussion about the impact of our foreign policies and what they really mean for people. I don't deliberately go out to put myself in dicey situations. Sometimes they just happen in these unpredictable places, especially when people are threatened with violence.
Kelly, I assume you are American-born. You are an all-American lady. Tell us how you got interested in the Middle East in the first place.
I'm from Buffalo, New York. I am American-born, American-raised. I had never thought about going to the Middle East. I had never thought about going to a place that was as threatened as the Middle East was, as Iraq was in February of 2003. But I got an email from someone who was going with a women's delegation, and I don't know why it struck me. I can't even tell you why. I know I was feeling very helpless about the impending war. I'd been on peace marches. I had written letters to my congressman. I'd written letters to the editor of my local newspaper, and none of that felt useful. I was feeling very unheard in those days under the Bush administration, and I think many of us were as well. I mean, there are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of us demonstrating, and still they were moving headlong toward war. So when I got this email from an acquaintance saying that she was going with a women's delegation to Iraq to bring back these women's stories, that touched me. That felt like something I could do. And so I signed up for the trip and ended up going, and it was really quite life-changing because I didn't know what to expect, and I didn't know if Iraqi women would embrace me or not, or if they would consider me the enemy. And I was just so touched with their hospitality and their genuineness and their fear and their concern about their families and their resilience that I couldn't help myself. I had to come home and write and speak about it. And so in the 18 months between that trip in February 2003, just before the invasion, and the re-election of President Bush 18 months later, I spoke to hundreds of audiences about my experiences. I was speaking to groups 2 or 3 or 4 times a week because I thought it was really important that we understand what the impact of our bombing was. Because, I mean, when you think about it, here we're sitting back here, we're we're thousands and thousands of miles away from Iraq where these bombs are, and we're watching CNN or Fox News or, whatever we watch, and that's all we see are these aerial shots of bombs dropping, and it looks like a video game. We don't see the hospital getting bombed on the ground. We don't see the children running and screaming away from the bombs. We don't see the terrified parents trying to protect their children and their families. That's not our image of what happens. Instead, it looks like glorified fireworks. And so I want to bring that on the ground story back, and that's why I went.
Kelly, do you speak Arabic? Have you picked up some Arabic words?
Oh, I know about 8 phrases. I'm embarrassed. I'm very bad with languages.
And did you grasp the fundamental principles of the religion, Islam, that ISIS claims to represent?
I've spoken with so many Muslims and so many Middle Eastern Catholics and Christians, and I know that part of the members of ISIS are religious zealots, and they're doing this in the name of their so-called religion. I think that the majority of the ISIS fighters don't have anything, this is my personal opinion, but they don't have anything to do with religion, that they're just disaffected youth who are angry and have nothing better to do, and they join these organizations, perhaps not knowing exactly what they're getting into, and then it just escalates from there. Not unlike, some of the ways that American soldiers get recruited. That they don't have too many other choices in their life, so they go and they join the U.S. military. And the U.S. military soldiers that I spoke with, both in the Middle East and back in the United States who served over there, the majority that I've spoken with didn't really feel an ideological calling to join the military. They did it because it felt like something that might be good for their future, and it would be a career option for them. It was a way to pay for college or a way to learn some skills that they could use when they got out of the Army. So it wouldn't surprise me if a wide variety of the so-called ISIS fighters were just there because that was the only option they felt they had. Now, again, I'm not sympathizing with them, but I'm just saying that I don't think it's all about religious zealotry. And I don't think the ISIS fighters who are fighting on behalf of religion represent Islam at all.
Stay with us, Kelly, please. We will be back after the break.
Jumana K-Ruz. You've seen her images on giant billboards across the metro. Jumana K-Ruz. You've seen her images on buses across the city. Now get to know Jumana K-Ruz.
It's sad, but it seems like we live in an age where most lawyers are focused on the bottom line, the money. And a lot of people have stopped wanting to truly advocate. I'll never forget this case. This woman chose me as a lawyer of last resort. She was hit by a semi-truck. I was able to recover about $480,000. Not every lawyer is an advocate, but every lawyer should be an advocate.
Let Jumana Keyrus protect your rights. Call the law offices of Jumana Keyrus at 1-866-YOUR-RIGHTS, extension 100, or visit yourrights.com.
Ziyad brand. Quality products from our family to yours. Ziyad Brothers Importing offers the finest quality products, including brands like Sultan, Kraft, Nestle, Hook, Rico Picon, Donna, and many more. Ask your retailer to carry these fine products because you deserve the very best. For more information, visit our website at www.ziyad.com. That's www.ziyad.com. Ziyad, quality products from our family to yours.
Life for Relief and Development is a nonprofit charity that has been providing humanitarian aid and development to people and communities regardless of race, color, religion, or cultural background for over 22 years. When disaster occurs here or around the world, Life rushes to provide food, medical aid, and shelter to those in need. Life also has development projects that provide medical relief, water purification, educational programs, relief for orphans, and much more. Your help and support can greatly improve these efforts. All donations are tax deductible. For more information, please visit our website at lifeusa.org or call 248-424-7493. That's lifeusa.org, 248-424-7493.
I am Asif Abdel-Jawad. Join me the first Friday of each month at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be discussing some of the most important issues and events in the Middle East live on America's Voice of the Arabs. WNZK 690 AM and WDMV 700 AM.
Welcome back to our discussion with Kelly Hayes Raitt, author, citizen, journalist. She has been to the Middle East region, particularly Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon, and we are discussing here aspects of her upcoming book and also her experience there. And let me ask you, Kelly, you said a few minutes ago that you don't believe ISIS represent Islam as a religion. Now, ISIS is being described by a lot of people as a bunch of psychopaths. How do you explain the fact that so many people, even from Europe and elsewhere, have joined ISIS?
You know, I wish I had the answer to that. I think that's an excellent question. And I think it's one that really needs to be raised in the White House, because that would give us a better idea of who this enemy is. I think one of the huge difficulties we're facing as Americans and as policymakers is trying to figure out who this enemy is. Who exactly is it that we're fighting? Are we fighting ideologues? Are we fighting, just disaffected youth? I mean, who are these people? And I think if we got to that question of, what is it that makes a young man or a young woman leave a country like Great Britain and go to Syria and decide and leave their families behind and go to Syria and decide to fight with these terrorists? I spent the summer in the UK, and that was a big question on people's minds and in the news. Why are people doing this? And I think it's an excellent question. I don't think it's one that's been answered. But I think if you look at where these youth are coming from, or where these young people are coming from to go fight, a lot of them are coming from societies that have predominantly military economies that really strangle opportunities and futures for them. So I think that might be part of it. But I don't have a great answer on that. I wish I did.
Let me ask you about the political situation in Syria and Iraq. But first, I want to know if you think you can be a journalist and an activist at the same time.
I think there's no other way to be. I don't believe that journalists are unbiased. I don't believe that journalists have ever been unbiased. And I'm certainly not unbiased, and I think it's more transparent that my audience know where I'm coming from and what's happening. Now, that doesn't mean that the information that I'm giving is untrue. It means that I'm giving information that has a certain perspective to it. But I think it's very important that we get all of the different perspectives before we send our young men and women to war. I think it's important that we get a variety of perspectives before we start bombing populations where we could be bombing civilians. When I was doing my public speaking, when I came back from Iraq, one of the audiences that I would speak to were high school and middle school students in schools. And I used to have a blue bag with me that had photos in it that I would show that would illustrate my talk. And I would ask the kids, what do you think the most important thing is that I use when I'm out thinking about a story? And the kids were really cute. They'd say, a computer and a telephone and so forth. And then they would laugh when I would pull out of my bag an empty toilet paper roll. And what I would do with that is I would hold it up to one eye like a telescope and cover my other eye and explain to them that that's the way that a news camera sees the world, is through that little ring up at one eye. And so I would explain to them that the reason why I went to the Middle East was to ask two questions. Why are the news media showing me just what's inside this little circle? And what aren't they showing me outside of that circle? And frankly, I don't pretend that I can come back and give all perspectives. I'm not that gifted. I don't think anybody can do that. But I can give a different circle. And showing all of those different perspectives and getting as many of those different perspectives as possible, I think is imperative before we engage in military action and put our soldiers at risk and put civilians in other countries at risk.
Kelly, you are advocating a peaceful approach to dealing with ISIS. Do you support a peaceful political approach to dealing with the government of Bashar al-Assad in Damascus?
I do, and I think the United States really has not been very engaged in that at all. I think President Obama's back was to the wall last summer when Assad used chemical weapons against his own people, which was just horrific. President Obama had said that was a red line, and so he was sort of forced to act. Thank goodness we ended up not doing that, and there was a diplomatic solution that saved lives all the way around. But other than that, I think the United States has been woefully inadequate in trying to help the Syrian people. We're trying to create any kind of diplomatic response to that. I will say that what the U.S. has done that I am proud of is we've been the number one, by far, the largest recipient or the largest donor of refugee aid and humanitarian aid for Syrian refugees. And I think that's something that doesn't get discussed enough, that behind the scenes, the U.S. has really provided a lot of humanitarian aid for refugees, and that should be applauded and increased. But I don't think the way to increase it is to drop more bombs. And again, for more information about the petition and to sign, our listeners can go to www.arewereallyoutofiraq.com.
Kelly, the Middle East is rampant with conspiracy theory, and you have people saying that ISIS is a creation of Bashar al-Assad, and you have others saying, in fact, it is a creation of the U.S. Your comment?
Again, I don't know, but I do think that that's something that needs to be better explored to find out just who it is that we're supposed to be fighting over there. I mean, here we're arming the rebels in Syria, and we don't know where those arms are ending up. But we do know that some of those arms are ending up in ISIS's hands. So it just doesn't make sense to me that we would be, arming anybody over there right now when we don't know how those weapons are going to be used. And I would argue that instead we should be putting together a strong coalition to stem the flow of weapons going into Syria and frankly going into Iraq.
Some people blame Mr. Maliki, former Prime Minister of Iraq. They blame him for the emergence of ISIS. How much do you think Maliki is to blame?
This happened before he even assumed the presidency. This happened before there was even a presidency in Iraq. Al-Qaeda, Al-Qaeda in Iraq, the precursor to ISIS, was there during the U.S. occupation. So, I don't know how anybody coming into the position of being the first president of Iraq following a U.S. occupation could possibly fight any terrorist organization like that. So I don't put blame anywhere except at the feet of former President George Bush and Vice President Dick Cheney for creating this vacuum in Iraq in the first place that allowed Al-Qaeda in Iraq to flourish.
A lot of people think that the As-Sahwa awakening, the Sunni units that General Petraeus had created in the Anbar region, western Iraq, in fact, is the real root or nucleus for ISIS. Do you agree with that assessment?
I honestly don't know. I don't have information about that. And one of the first things that the United States did when we went into Iraq was to basically decommission the whole army and anybody who had any ties to a Ba'athist party, which was, of course, the only way anybody could get a job is to join the Ba'athist party at that time. And when we did that, we did two things. We created a huge, huge power vacuum. And then we also created a group of people who were trained soldiers and security forces, armed, and then had no future and had their jobs taken away from them by this occupying force, the U.S. military. So, it was one of the strategically, I think, most stupid things the United States could do. Instead of engaging and enlisting these security forces and police officers and former soldiers, instead of enlisting them into rebuilding and protecting their own country, we did just the opposite. We took away any sense of future they had, any sense of present dignity that they had, or any way for them to participate in the rebuilding of their country. And we did that not just with soldiers and security forces and police officers. We did that with contractors. I mean, one of the places that I went to when I was in Iraq was I snuck into a meeting being held by Bechtel, which is one of the U.S. corporations that went in there in these no-bid contracts to rebuild Iraq following the bombings, the initial bombings and occupation. And I listened to their representative, the guy by the name of Randy Jackson from Dallas, Texas, who was interviewing Iraqis who wanted to get hired to rebuild their own country. And the Iraqis would come in with their application all filled out, and Randy Jackson would ask them three questions. How many people do you employ? How old is your equipment? And do you have insurance? Now, that last question, of course, was a total stumper because there was no insurance in Iraq. The banks were all decimated at that point. This was in July of 2003, 9 weeks after the U.S.-led invasion. And basically what I witnessed was the United States setting the bar too high for Iraqis to get hired to rebuild their own country. So instead we had these carpetbagging companies from the U.S., like Halliburton, coming in and making huge profits on rebuilding Iraq, and that money did not trickle down to Iraqis. It didn't create Iraqi jobs. It didn't give people a sense of future or pride in their own community. And instead, 10 years later, we can turn around now and verify that Halliburton's profits during that 10 years was $38.5 billion U.S. dollars. That's billion with a B.
Kelly, we will have a couple of other questions, brief questions for you, but after we come back from our break. Welcome back to our discussion of ISIS, whether we can apply peaceful means as advocated by our guest, Kelly Hayes Wright, author and citizen journalist. She is working on an upcoming book. We will talk in a few remaining minutes about her book. Kelly, when do you expect the book to come out?
Oh, thank you for asking. I'm looking right now for a literary agent to help me find a publisher. So I'm hoping to have the book out sometime in the next year. And if our listeners would like to stay in touch with me or learn more about my book, they can visit my website, which can be accessed through arewereallyoutofiraq.com. And that's also a way to find my email address and email me personally if any of our listeners would like to stay in touch. But I am hoping that the book will be published soon and will be an opportunity for Americans to really understand the impact that our foreign policies have on people on the ground, on individual moms and dads who are just like us.
Will the book include unusual photography, photos?
I do have photographs, and it depends on what the publisher wants to do with those photographs. But primarily what my book is my eyewitness of U.S. policies there, my eyewitnessing of the refugee crisis that happened during the occupation of Iraq, what's happening with Palestinians. I've spent time in Palestinian refugee camps in Lebanon and in the West Bank, and have personal stories of Palestinians' experiences in those camps. And again, a lot of that comes back to, what the U.S. weapons manufacturers' influence is in Washington. And a lot of that really sets our foreign policies. So I'm hoping that the book will, through these human stories and these personal experiences, will help us understand better some of the policies that are occurring in the Middle East and what drives those U.S. policies.
Kelly, you have met Syrian and Iraqi refugees. Do you think those refugees from both countries are getting enough attention, enough support from either regional countries or the international community?
No, and not nearly enough support. And it's really hard. It's a hugely traumatized population who need everything: food, water, shelter, education, hope, a future, psychological help, long-term physical. Some of them are, have physical disabilities now as a result of what they've been through. Huge psychological scars, and there are whole generations of children now that are growing up with those psychological scars. We're going to be dealing with the aftermath of the Iraq War for the last 10 years and this horrible civil war that's happening in Syria right now. We're going to be dealing with this for generations. And there is the amount of humanitarian aid that's going in to help people now is a drop in the bucket of what's needed and what is going to continue to be needed for many, many years to come.
Kelly, thank you very much. We have been talking with Kelly Hayes Wright, author and citizen journalist, and we have been discussing whether or not we can deal with ISIS through peaceful means. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you the first Friday of next month. Goodbye.
Sena Briku for all your Metro Detroit real estate needs. 248-755-3494. Whether buying or selling, short sales, foreclosure, or investment for both business and residential, call Sena Briku, owner and broker of St. Jude Realty, at 248-755-3494. If you're facing legal problems, it's time to get the right attorney working for you. Ziad Gossett is experienced in foreclosure defense, eviction, and real estate law, as well as immigration matters, workers' comp, bankruptcy, business law, and all criminal matters. With attorney Ziad Gossett in your corner, you won't have to fight alone. Call 248-680-7300. That's 248-680-7300.
الدكتور عبادة زحيلي أخصائي أمراض الغدد والسكري، خبرة 12 سنة من الأبحاث الطبية والتعامل مع أمراض السكري، آخر الأبحاث والدراسات الصادرة. لدى مركز زحيلي طاقم طبي متميز لاستقبالكم، يتكلمون لغتكم العربية والإنجليزية. مراكز الزحيلي مجهزة بشكل كامل لراحتكم والعناية بكم من خلال استقبالكم على 27207 لاشر رود في مدينة ساوثفيلد. لحجز المواعيد اتصلوا على الرقم 248-809-5988 248-809-5988. مراكز زحيلي لأمراض الغدد والسكري ترحب بكم.
الأمثال على الوفاء. جلست العصر مثلي بين جفنات العنب والعناقيد تدلى كثريات الذهب. هل جلست العصر مثلي